Hello, my name is Betty David Ross. Today I want to share a way of approaching phonics that I've been working on. It's called the Phonics Discovery System. As you see, I'm going to be covering just phase one here, which implies a phase two, which I'll make a second video for this. This is not something you use instead of traditional phonics. This is something that complements traditional phonics. Um, Somebody pointed out that the definition of phonics in the dictionary is a system for teaching reading. Well, this is a slight contrast to traditional phonics. So, as phonics is defined here, it has to do with the relationship between the basic sound units of words called phonemes and the letters that represent them. Well, a little bit about myself. As I said, my name is Betty David Ross. I've been teaching roughly forever, and I'm still teaching. And I have a master's in reading. I have extensive training in traditional phonics. I have a strong background in linguistics, cognition, and neuroscience, all of which contribute to my thinking here. I'm going to cover a little bit about the difference between phase one and phase two to start, so that you have an idea of what to anticipate here. So in phase one, we always start with a spoken word. So if I have the word Sam written, I'm not going to ask the student to read it. I'm going to tell the student what the word is. And if the student can read it, they can read it themselves. But we're going to start with a sound. And then we're going to ask, what are the sounds in this word? And then we're going to ask what letters represent these sounds. In phase two, we always start with a written word. This resembles what reading really is. And we're going to ask which letters represent sounds. And then we're going to ask what sound do these letters represent. Then we're going to blend those sounds together to produce that word. Many of you say, well, why not just go directly to phase two? Well, going to phase two is without having the tools for doing it. So you need some basic tools, and those you learn in phase one. Traditional phonics teaches the relationship between the basic sound units of speech and the letters that represent them explicitly. It teaches what? Boys and girls, this is the letter A, this is the sound it makes. Boys and girls, what's this letter? What sound does it make? What's the letter? What sound does it make? The only source of information is the teacher, and the student's only job is to memorize exactly what the teacher has taught them. The phonics discovery system teaches a method for the student to discover the relationship between the basic sound units of speech, also known as the phonemes, and the letters that represent them. It teaches a method of observation. It teaches how to figure it out, how to figure it out on your own, how to use the knowledge you have to figure out something new. I've mentioned the word phonemes a couple of times. I've told you that they are the basic sound units of speech. Phonemes and basic sound units of speech are the same thing. What is a phoneme? Now, many teachers out there have heard the term and they know what it is. But a phoneme is a unit of sound that distinguishes one word from another. For instance, the example of cat versus pat, it's the initial sound. And you'll go, well, that's obvious. The letters are different. But, if you're talking to a 2-year-old who can't read and you say, don't pat the cat, the 2-year-old will know what you're talking about, and they can't read. Or if you say, most of them can't read at any rate. Or if you say the same 2-year-old, don't cat the pat, they're going to give you an odd look because they're going to know what you say didn't make sense. And in that case, it's the initial sound, the first sound in the word. In the case of cat versus cot, we have a difference in the middle or the medial sound. The cat is on the cot means one thing. The cot is on the cat means something different and a little bit more concerning. In the third example, we have the cat versus cap, and we're looking at the final sound, the last sound in the word. So the cat is under the cap, or the cap is under the cat. Both are sensible, and a 2-year-old would know the difference. Science has shown that phonemic awareness is the single best predictor of reading success, which means if students can hear sounds. Now that's different from memorizing what the teacher says. Hearing sounds, and I'll give you an example of that as we go along. Right now, I'd like to take a look in the lower left-hand corner, and we're going to take a look at the difference between letters and phonemes, okay? In the word pat, we have 3 letters and we have 3 sounds. P, a, t. In the word phone, we have 5 letters and 3 sounds. F, o, m. PH is a perfectly regular spelling for the F sound. In a number of cases, it's used in both at the end, like in graph, in the beginning, like in phone. Um, and the E at the end of the word is also something we see very commonly in English. When you see one E at the end of a word that's more than 3 letters in English, it is almost guaranteed to be silent. If you can find exception, let me know. Okay. In the third example, we have the word plate. Again, we have 5 letters, but then we have 4 phonemes. We have p, l, a, t. Some teachers are taught that p, l makes one sound. Now I hear it, pl, pl, pl. I hear both the p and the l. Those are 2 separate sounds. If you want to teach them as a consonant blend to your teachers who know what that means, that's one thing, but make sure they know the individual sounds before you do it. I've talked about using discovery to learn. There's no way I would expect a child to discover the letters of the alphabet. Commissioning a child to do that is a lifetime project up there with decoding the Rosetta Stone. Now that has to be taught. Boys and girls, this is the letter A, this is the capital letter A, this is the lowercase a, this is what it looks like. Boys and girls, what's this letter? What's this letter? The teacher is the only source of information, unless there's some other kid in the class who knows the alphabet, came to school knowing the alphabet, which you often have. And the child's job, the student's job, is to just memorize the letters of the alphabet. But in the case of the sounds, the relationship between the sounds and the letter, once the student knows English, they don't have to have a perfect pronunciation. They don't have to have a standard pronunciation. They can speak with a foreign accent. They have to have a knowledge of English. And they know the English alphabet, what's called the Latin alphabet, which, for instance, people who come from Arabic countries don't know and have to learn. They have enough to start discovering it. For instance, I can hear the sounds in at, and I know they're 2 letters. And if I know that both those letters represent a sound, then I can start teasing everything apart and figuring it out myself. Is that the only way you should go about learning it? No. But is that a very important element in the learning for a successful reader? Yes. I'm going to give you an opportunity to practice this listening skill. According to the most advanced and detailed phonics programs, there are 8 predictable sounds for the letter A. I know. These are predictable, regular spellings. Okay, so the A in apple, anybody who's had any phonics knows that sound is A. Also with apron, apron. But what's the A sound in was? Follow your mouth. Don't go. Oh, it's like, yeah, surprise. It is an and it's absolutely predictable. What's the A sound in watch? And that's basically short O. What's the A sound in ball? And that A is determined by the L. The L tells you, but it doesn't happen in all cases. There are, if you say the name Al, it doesn't happen that way. But in most cases, that's going to make an aw sound. So you might call it an L-controlled A. Then we have the word in star. No, I'm not going R together, but that A never occurs unless there's an R after it. It's called an R-controlled vowel. Then courage, it's a short I, age. And beggar, we don't say beg-ar, we say beggar. All right, and again, these are completely predictable. There are rules for them. Okay. As you can tell, this method is a method of teaching observation skills for the purpose of learning decoding skills. I think I've just observed what good students must do. And anybody who says you can't learn to read through discovery hasn't watched a 4-year-old come and, after parents have read 3 books to them, they're often reading. The parent didn't teach them every word in the English language. Parent didn't consciously teach them every pattern. But their minds, every infant mind, they come in and they look for patterns. We're natural pattern seekers. I remember I went to school in the 40s, not my 40s, 1940s. And we were taught by the whole word method. We were literally expected to memorize every word in the English language. It makes it worse than Chinese. Okay, so in 2nd grade, Mrs. Rooney stood up in front of the class and she said, boys and girls, look for the little words and the big words. And I remember it because I'm thinking like, OR doesn't mean or in the word for, and it doesn't. Well, it's true. But, then I got it. Or, and then I could do more fortune. And I can see the pattern. There's an, they're little words, in, on, and there are lots, there's a name for them, and they're just called word family units because EG is not a word, a little word, but it is a unit that I can work with. And I don't know how long it took me to do it automatically, maybe a week or so. And then my mind was going off and doing it on its own. I'm going to give you a demonstration of this process in this slide. And this will be the most explicit version with the most carefully outlined steps. And I use this with students who don't know how to read or beginning readers, or particularly those who show no sign of phonemic awareness or even have visual perceptual problems. Some of these students have processing problems. Others simply ignore their senses. They think they're supposed to do everything by memory because that's what it looks like what we do. They don't realize the value of their own knowledge in the process of learning. This method teaches them to pay attention to what they hear and what they feel. As I do this demonstration, remember I'm teaching a process, not correct pronunciation. Unless you want to learn my Bronx accent, be my guest. Okay? And this process is going to represent my pronunciation of the individual sounds and my pronunciation, or the students. And that may be different, and that's okay. When I do this process, I do not focus on correcting anybody's pronunciation, whether it be regional or foreign. My parents never lost their German accents. They were really good readers. My father got a law degree from Fordham. For the material, I may use a student's name because in some cases, that's the only thing they can read. And they know their names and they can read them, and they're really pretty familiar with the sounds. And they're confident with their own names. And so in that case, I'll have to break down the word into syllables if it's multisyllabic, and then identify the individual sounds. Some cases I will do it. In some cases, I'll ask them to participate and tell me what the sounds are. In this particular case, I'm going to be using a sight word list. I can hear many of you saying, well, the sight words aren't phonically regular. Well, some are and some aren't. But the goal of this is phonemic awareness. And all spoken words in all languages are made up of phonemes. There are no exceptions. They're all made up of phonemes. As I do this activity, keep in mind, I'm focusing on the sensory input. Now, the first word is the. I've been using this process for years. Do you know how many times I've analyzed the word the? Oh my gosh. Okay, so, but I am not going to do it, but I'm going to model using my senses. So here are the steps. The first step, say the word. Second step, name all the letters in the word. Third step, name the individual sounds, make the individual sounds. Fourth step, write the letters that represent the sounds. Now, You may say, well, why bother naming the sounds? If my students know the letters, why do I have to name the sounds again? If you work with students who have reading problems, you will notice they leave out letters. They will read words, they'll leave out letters, they'll invert them, they'll do everything else. Again, there may be a processing problem, but in some cases, they literally, their eyes are not trained to recognize the letters quickly enough. And I have an example of with when I was in grad school, I had a roommate who was a geneticist. I went to her lab. She said, in this box, they're all fruit flies with red dots, and this one no red dots. And I'm going, what red dots? Now I'm not learning disabled. I don't have a visual processing problem, but I didn't see the red dots. You have to be trained to do that, and she could pick it up like a shot. And that's what we wanted our students to be able to do, to perceive things that quickly, and that takes training. Okay, so all right, so we say the first word. The first word is the. I know the word, you know the word, which is something I do say with some students because I'm emphasizing they have the knowledge they need. All right, and the letters, T-H-E. I've said that, or they've said it. Whatever they can do, they do. Whatever they're, by the way, not just what they can do, what they're comfortable doing, because I'm not going to push students into fear zone. So then what's the first sound in the? Okay, so I'm modeling. And then I write the letters. No, I do not explain. This is a digraph. I don't explain anything at this point. If they're that low level, I don't explain anything. I just model it. It's just implicit information out there. What's the second sound in the? Now, in many cases, students will want to participate. So we do the next word. Student knows the word of. Great. What are the letters? O-F. Fantastic. Well, what's the first sound in of? And they'll go, ah. So I go, of. I have a bag of chips. I have a bag of chips. I don't say that. I say bag of chips. Do you say of? Now, if he says of, that's correct, because he's identifying the sounds in his speech. But if he doesn't say of and he says of the way I do, then he has to identify that sound correctly. Okay, so it's, see, because I got an of, I have to go back and I have to re-anchor in my senses here. So, and I'm thinking of the word. That's how I'm doing it. Okay. And by the way, this E and this O have the same pronunciation. It's called the schwa. It's the most commonly spoken sound in the English language. Okay, what's the second sound in of? All right. If the student notices that it's an F and that should be a V, then I'll discuss it. Otherwise, I won't even discuss it. All right. And I'll leave that for a more advanced stage of learning. And the next slide will show you the steps explicitly. Just list them. Here are the lists and the processes. As I promised, step one, say the word the, name the letters, T-H-E, identify the sounds. The first sound is th, write the letters for representing the TH, immediately the TH. Identify the second sound, and then write that letter. There are two other slides with demonstrations that are following. There's one immediately after this. Then there'll be a number of slides discussing syllable division and certain other rules for doing this, and then a slide showing the process with middle school material. Okay, now I'm going to give you a demonstration for phase one. You can see the sentence on there. It's a complete sentence. I like working with complete sentences, especially beginning students. And this material comes from Gail Carpenter, and it's designed for beginning students or students who are having difficulty learning to read. I use it with students no older than 9 who are reading on a kindergarten level. As soon as I can, I take off and I work with other material. I can work with it slowly, I can work with it quickly, I can work with it repetitively, but I still work with material that is more suitable for the student's interest and ego level, frankly. Okay, for instance, I'm working with a 14-year-old who was reading at a low second grade level. So I had some material in my side of the first session. I said, I have some stuff at a third grade level, fifth grade level. I have some Hawaiian pidgin here, which is a local patois, and Hawaii, which is mostly English. And I have a book on philosophy. Which would you prefer? Well, guess what he said? The book on philosophy. Notice he's not 9 years old and he doesn't read on a kindergarten level. So I worked with the book on philosophy. He knew the meaning of all the words. And I mean, we only worked on one sentence in half an hour. But he didn't feel put down by the material. You have to be very careful with that with students. But here I'm going to show you simple material, okay? So the first word is SAMS. Now, whenever I start, I'm always modeling first. And while this is a discovery system, I'm really modeling the process of analyzing it. In the process of doing that, I'm also modeling the sound-letter relationship. But that does not mean that if the student pronounces it differently from me, they're wrong. They may say the word differently from me. I was working with a woman the other day. She said, I said, Carol, Carol, Carol. She said, oh, you must be from the East Coast. You say it the way I do. How do other people say it? I think Carol, Carol, Carol. Well, one a K and I say Ka. Well, I'm not modeling my East Coast accent. Okay. I'm not trying to disseminate this to the world. All right. So let's take a look at SAMs. So the first sound in SAM, and I'm modeling is S, A, and I'm going to really, as I'm doing it, I'm modeling it. I'm going to pay attention to what I'm doing. I'm not going to do it as if it's a routine that I've done 1,000 times. I'm listening because I'm modeling the procedure. Sam, M, Sam's, Z. But there's only an S, so it must be the S that's representing the SAM. Big. Now, if the students are secure in the alphabet, then I don't bother saying it out loud anymore. Big. B. E. G. When you do the beginning students, I strongly recommend that you write it because there's something about the writing. It is very engaging. It's sensory engaging. If you just print out large letters, in some format that's interesting, it doesn't have the same effect. Bag, B, A, G. Sat, S, A, T, on, A, mat, A. And you might say, why bother doing the little words? Well, I have to tell you something. I've done an audio file on this with 5 stories, a 90-minute, literally a 90-minute cassette. Remember the days of cassettes? I sat in my office and did that. And 90 minutes of this on some stories I had written. And at the end, I went downstairs to read and I went, that went fast. And the truth of the matter is, if you want to improve your reading, you can do this and it will improve your reading speed. And you're wondering why? Well, it heightens your perceptual system. And you're going, how can this do? Well, think of professional musicians and they spend 2 hours a day, on the practicing the scales. And this is the scales. This is the scales of reading. This is the equivalent. So if you want to improve, you have to go back to the basics. Okay, now I'm going to cover start covering how to deal with um, multisyllabic words. Let's have a drum roll for the roll of the syllable of decoding. Okay? You're always decoding syllables and then stringing them together. So you're always decoding one syllable and stringing the bunch together. And the first thing you must do, either in phase 1 or phase 2, is determine how many syllables are in a word. And the vowels are the cornerstones of the syllables. And except for the second syllable rhythm, I think, which I discovered literally has no vowel letter in it, you can be guaranteed a vowel letter in almost every syllable. And you have to look for them. You have to become a vowel hunter. Okay, now we're dealing with phase 1, not phase 2. So here's a trick for dividing words into syllable in phase 1. Remember, you're working from the sound. The system for determining syllables in phase 2 is very different because you're not doing it by sound. You're doing it visually with the letters. So what I suggest, think of a mother calling her child home from a great distance. It's important that you have the thumbs underneath your chin, which you'll see why in a minute. So the mother's calling her child, Raymond. You can see, I can feel my jaw going up and down. Watch this. Raymond. And you go, well, why don't you just have the kids? Well, if the kids can clap it, fine, have them clap it. And they're right all the time. Don't bother with this. But if they can't, and many of them can't, they'll go Ray, Mund, and they'll say 3 syllables or 4 syllables. And if they do that, this is the trick that seems to work. And the reason you're doing it as a mother shouting is so that you open your mouth wide. Because, for instance, you can go, Raymond, without barely moving your jaw, and then you have no way of figuring out, look like a ventriloquist. You have no way of figuring out what the syllables are. So if you yell it like a mom calling her child, Raymond, you get the bounces. And also if you yell preposterous, as if it's a child's name, preposterous, you can feel the bounces. Now, one thing I strongly advise is you use this method is that you always use correct English spelling. A system was tried called invented spelling, and the students learned to write fairly well, but they couldn't read English. So they've given up on this. Now you'll see my first example here with intruded sounds looks like an exception for that. And it's fudging a little bit. Because we have such things as intruded sounds in English. In other words, there's a sound for which there is no letter that represents them. And that's often, in the case of one, it's the W. The O represents the NE. There's nothing there for the W. So I put that up in superscript. So far, I've never had a student become confused by that. And you're going, well, it is confusing. Well, all of phonics is confusing. Learning to read English is a confusing process. So you pick your choices, and I find that the virtue of learning phonics and sticking this in doesn't make a lot of difference. At least I've never had a problem. In the case of hour, I don't know how most of you pronounce it, but I do it as 2 syllables for sure. Hour, hour. You can see the 2 bounces. So I put an in there, whether I'm talking about time, I'm talking about our family, or whatever I'm talking about. And the last example, tire. I don't know if you're going to say the R. My sister pointed out in some places in the country, they said ta. They don't pronounce the R. So I would code that, taking the dash out between the E and the R, but leaving that E as a superscript. So again, you want to make sure you keep the spelling. The next feature of English I'd like to discuss is that there are silent letters and digraphs. A silent letter is a letter as it sounds is silent. For instance, like we discussed before, the E, the final E, in a word like or one, is silent. It makes no sound. If you have a one E letter at the end of a word of more than 3 letters, it's going to be silent. I can't think of an exception. As I said before, if you can think of one, let me know. And that E actually has a function because its signal gives you information about the preceding vowel, the I in this case. It tells you it's a long I. It doesn't always do that. It can live I mean, there are lots of love. There are lots of problems. There are exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, it's as with everything in English, there's a statistical likelihood of it being that. Okay, so you just say, well, what's the highest frequency? What's the most likely possibility? Now, in the word case of listen, that T serves no function whatsoever. It's just there. Again, my sister kindly looked it up, and apparently the word used to be, will you listen to me? And listen, the en got added on, and they didn't take the T out. They dropped the sound. So that's why that's there. And the third example, the word talked, that L is silent, and it's there to signal that the A is an L controlled A. It makes an aw sound, not an a or an a sound. Now, as a rule, I'll say keep vowels with vowels, keep consonants with consonants. This happens to be an exception for me. But if you choose to code it as TA dash and put the LK together to keep your consonants together, it will still work. And you can play around with this a little bit and experiment and explore yourself and see what works. If you have something that's really novel, let me know. I would love to know. The last word is cheat. Now, when we before in the word plate, we had plate, p, and they're really two sounds, p, in the word cheat. It isn't k or sh, s. The C doesn't make a separate sound from the H. It's two letters representing one sound. English has 26 letters and 44 phonemes. So they had to cheat somewhere. And they cheated on the word cheat with a ch sound. They gave it a combination, which is called a digraph. EA is also considered a digraph. There are two letters that make one sound. And the sound in this case is E. That A makes no sound. That A is just there to signal something about the E. And the last trick I want to get into is dividing double consonants and dividing between double consonants in the middle of multisyllable words. We have the word robber and pepper. Well, if we're doing it by sound, robber. I don't say robber. I don't know if you do, but I don't. And I don't say pepper. I only do one B. I go ra-ber, which means one of them is silent. And I recommend that you divide between the two of them for two reasons. One, it's the convention. It's taught in every phonics program that you divide between the two. But more importantly, dividing, if you don't divide between the two, and you put both the B's in the last syllable, you wind up with BBER. And no English word can be spelled that way. It's impossible. And the rule is that every syllable should look like it could be an English word. Okay. So here's an important piece of information to take into account. As you approach the work as you would a video game, playfully. Not like you have to get it right, but you have to kind of experiment and see how it works out. And you're going to fail. You anticipate failure. And you anticipate with the failure, you'll learn to improve. So this is a system for discovering the basic sound units of words and their relationship to the letters. You will make mistakes. I still make mistakes. And one of the reasons is that as you're using this, you're not using work that is phonetically predictable. You're going to come across surprises. You're going to come across things that you did not anticipate. And then you're going to have to listen and pay attention to your mouth and go, oh, no, that's not what it is. And I'm telling you, I still make mistakes to this day. That a student will say something and I go, no, that's not right. Oh, wait a minute. They are right. Okay, remember, you're not teaching the correct sounds. You're teaching a system for discovering them. This system works with all alphabetic languages. If a student says to me, Like this, how often happens. I say, there, here's the word was. What are the sounds in was? And the student go, ass. And I'll say to them, well, if that's the way you say you sound, you're right. Do you say was? Do you say I was in school yesterday? My sister was sick yesterday? Do you say was? And they look at me and go, I say was. Well, then you don't have the right sounds. So what are the sounds in was? Listen to what you're saying. And they have to figure it out. Now, the other hand, it's possible that the student does say it differently than me. Like in the case of Carol and Carol, okay, they may actually say it differently than I do. And I was working with a little girl, a fourth grader, whose parents were Guatemalan and only spoke Spanish. We came across the word look. And I said to her, what are the sounds in look? And she went, look. So I say, if you, no, excuse me, she's look. And I said, well, Juliana, if you say look, I look out the window and I look for my book under the bed, then you're correct. But if you don't say look, what are the correct sounds in the word? Do you say look or do you say look? And as it happened to be, she said look. So she figured out the correct sounds. However, let's say she did say Luke. She said Luke under the bed. When I'm teaching reading, I make a point of not correcting pronunciation. And you go, well, how can they learn to read? I said, my parents went to their deathbeds with nice German accents. My father got a law degree in Fordham. My mother worked for years in this country, where in a place where she had to do a lot of reading and writing. She was just fine. They were just fine. So even with an accent, you can figure things out. That doesn't mean you don't want to encourage the students to learn a standard pronunciation for social reasons, not for reading. And in this case, I may say to a student, oh, you say Luke, and I say look. I suggest you always think that you're talking to the Queen of England, and she says schedule, and I say schedule. And you know what? That's interesting. And that's all it is. It's interesting. When a student hears you say, I say look, and they know who you are, they can make the choice for themselves. And you're not putting down their pronunciation. And you're not saying to them, you don't speak well enough to be able to rely on the information you have to teach yourself how to read. You don't want to do that. You want your students to feel they can rely on their own speech. Now I'm going to do a demonstration of higher level reading. I often work there with the printed word, and I have it already transcribed. So let's take it. So have to do the syllable division. Nature, nay, a. If it comes into the a, so I'm going to put my T in there. My division in there after the a. It's first syllable, a. Second syllable, chur. Sh, 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 sh. There's only a T here. That's the only consonant. So it's the one that's going to have to represent the ch. That's it. That's the way it works. But it's always in the consonant of URE. So I go ch, and I'm not surprised then when I see it again. Has. Has. Yeah, it's has. It's not an S. It's a Z. Endowed. Endowed. D. Ow. Ow. It's what's called a diphthongized vowel. We have all our long vowels. You can tell that they're that way because they're two mouth positions. A, E, I, O, U. My mouth is moving. My jaw is moving when I have a diphthongized vowel. And the short vowels, it doesn't do it. It's a, e, ah, and I can hold that mouth position as long as I have breath. Okay. The ed at the end of endowed is not a separate syllable, despite the fact that the e is there. It's endowed. So the ed represents one sound, d. The, yeah, you have got to listen. We say and I strongly recommend you teach it that way because I find a lot of students have confusion between and the. They don't know how to read it because teachers are teaching that the A is pronounced A, but nobody says A. They don't say a book, a table. They say So if you teach them A, then they get so it's the with an and the A is also an at the end of that line. Porcupine. Or porcupine. Mm. With body, I want to know where I split this up. I don't want to make it up. I don't want to go bod e. I want to make sure I could divide it in any number of places. But when I'm doing it by sound, because I am practicing sensory, paying attention to my senses, the what I hear and what my mouth does. So I'm going ba d. That's how I say it. So that's how I divide it. All right. Now, in the next word, I've done this several times. I've made this video over and over again, practicing it. Now, look, I did something interesting. I did covered. Well, I don't say covered. I made a mistake. So I say covered. I don't say covered. I say covered. So I made a mistake. And if I were working with students, I would do the same thing I'm doing right here. I'd say, wait a minute. I don't say that. I say this. I have to pay attention to what I'm saying. So now I have covered. And then the second stuff, d. Now you might say, why didn't I divide it after the R? Because, well, first place, the ED does not make a separate sound. Let's start for that for starters. But there are cases where they're like treated. I could even divide it with the ED at the end. But that's really a separate issue. And that can be covered later on. If your student has basic problems with word recognition, do it by sound. The separation between cover and ED, that's a morphological division, and it has to do with word meaning, not with sound. So with this level, I would definitely stick with sound. With, barbed, yes, there's only one vowel sound in barb. Wire, wired. That you have the quills. Look at the two L's together. They don't make a separate sound. All right, it's not a digraph. It's just two. It's not considered a digraph, but the th in that is considered a digraph. Two letters that make one sound. The o and loose is enough. Enough. Oh my goodness gracious. Okay. E, that's good. All right. The gh is enough. Oh my god. Okay. Two. It's not toe. It's you have to listen again. Ooh, and there are other words there are other words of that pattern like do. Okay, they're not a lot. It's just to and do that I can think of offhand. Come, yeah, it's not it's and there are reasons for this. Okay, off. So if at the, I'm going to go to slightest. Here again, this is a clear example where I am not dividing the word by word meaning. For instance, I'm not keeping the T with slight because it is slight and est is a suffix. I'm dividing it by sound. Slightest, because that's the way I say it. Touch. Okay. And this is, what level is this? This is unit 4H. This is like a 7th grade level. All right. There are 3 ways to use this for this teachers. Teachers can model it while the student simply observes. I was working in a small church-run school with children who were fleeing the Trenton public school systems and who were having a lot of trouble themselves. And their parents want them out because it was dangerous. And not that these kids weren't also dangerous. Somebody came in with a big box knife. Okay, a box cutter. So at any rate, so I worked with 3 girls for a year, 3 times a week, 20 minutes a day. And I had a book in my hand and I'd say, first word is the. What's the first sound of the? You're hearing silence. I heard noise. They're going, ah! So I go, and then I go, which letters represent? And I go, yeah, and I write TH on the board. And then I would say, what's the second sound in the? again. And this went on literally all year. There was only one other teacher in the school, like 20 kids in the whole school, just a middle school age range. And she said, these kids are doing a lot better. They're really reading. And then the child study team, the special ed team came in, and there was one of them in special ed and said, you've done an amazing job with this girl. And with this particular girl, this special ed girl, I ran into her mother at the Trenton train station a year later, and she said to me, I want you to know that the Trenton Public Schools told me that my daughter would never learn to read. She's taking GED courses now. So just modeling the procedure, just modeling it helps. If a student is very stressed out, even a student has been working for a while and then is just mentally exhausted, I tell them to relax and I'll model. It takes the pressure off them and they're still learning. Modeling is the traditional way of teaching, has been forever. Look at the way I chop wood. Look at the way I throw my spear. Whatever it is, you're modeling. Okay. And then the student and teacher work together. Often I write while the student tells me the sounds. And you say, well, why don't you just have them do the sounds? Well, sometimes, again, the cognitive load is too heavy for them. And also it gives me a little control. And then in the final case, the student does both. I observe. And if I see the student has a consistent problem with some sound pattern, I'll cover it traditionally using traditional phonics approaches. Here are ways to incorporate PDS into classroom teaching when using traditional phonics lessons. Do a word once a day, once a week, using the children's names. I was teaching in a Trenton Catholic school, and 3 weeks before the end of the year, the woman who was teaching first grade came up to me and she said, you have my son who's in sixth grade, and I have never seen such a tremendous improvement in reading. What do you do? So I went into her classroom, and she said she had made no progress. And I went into her classroom, and I said, what's your name? And the kid gave me the name. I said, how do you spell it? So I wrote it on the board. And then I made boxes, and I said, well, what's the first sound in you? What are the syllables in your name? What's the first sound in you? And I did this with a number of kids. I think I went in one time. About a week later, she came back. She says, the kids who are smart are just taking off and just figuring out words all over the place. And even the ones who are slower are making some progress. So she made more progress in the last 3 weeks of school than she had made the whole year using this approach. You can ask, number two, you can ask the children what words they would like to see transcribed. How do you just what do I do with this word? What are the sounds? You can model it. You know, they're asking you. You can ask other kids to help. Does anybody want to come up and figure this out? It's a game. It's really a game. Number three, do a full sentence once a week, transcribing all the words in the sentence. Again, no matter what level group you're working on, this is for building up reading speed and reading accuracy. Then you can create it. Fourth, you can create a study sheet for your weekly spelling lessons, describing all the sounds and letters of the word. So in Pilot, I don't just, you know, in this case, it probably be the long I and the spelling lesson, the I, but I'm transcribing all the letters. I'm asking the students to remember all the sounds, make all the sounds and identify which letters make the sound, not just the target one for the spelling lesson. When you're doing this, you're also modeling how to learn. And as with all learning experiences, including ours, you'll be surprised because you'll be dealing with things that aren't nailed down already. So what are you modeling? How to try something even if they're not sure it's going to work. How to deal with failure with dignity. You know, I made a mistake. I'm going, oh my God, oh my God. What am I going to do? Oh, wait a minute, I made a mistake. Wait, hold on, let me just get this correct. How to try repeatedly. How not to give up. How to think through a problem and make repeated attempts. How to rely on your background knowledge. Wait a minute. I've seen that A before. Let me see. A, P, apple. All right. How to change a pre-existing understanding or opinion. A lot of students get stuck because the word they figure that it doesn't, they don't hear something that makes sense to them and they panic. They literally panic. Wait, this doesn't make sense. And to learn to read, you're literally going to have to accept that something doesn't make sense for a minute and just breathe into it and let it go and figure it out with the next word. Figure it out a little later. Hold on to what it could possibly be. Don't go for something that is familiar right away. Don't change the pronunciation of the word. And then how to experience learning is fun. Here are a few helpful rules just to keep in mind. Every syllable should look like it could be an English word. This is really important. When dividing words into syllable, divide between two consonant letters if they are the same. Oh, look at that. I haven't caught that one in a while. Let's correct that way. They are the same. As in letter, Betty and Robert. And the final E in any word of more than 3 letters is silent. This is a method, not a method contrasting tradition. This is contrasting it. I'm just telling you how these contrast. Contrasting traditional phonics approaches and the discovery approach. It's not an either or option. I strongly encourage teachers who are more comfortable with the traditional approach to teaching phonics to continue doing that way. The discovery method can be included in these lessons. This is my primary approach for teaching decoding skills. I teach phonics rules where I think they're helpful. This is just a review of phase 1 and phase 2. I start with the spoken words in phase 1. I ask what are the sounds in this word and then what letters represent them. In phase 2, I start with the written form of the word. I ask which letters represent sounds and what sounds do these letters represent. And I will be covering phase 2 in a separate video. Okay, for more information or support, go to bettydr40@gmail.com. And I've included in here something about an audio file with phonemic breakdown. I've made an audio file where I read 5 stories and I break them down phonemically. So it goes once, once, upon, upon. And I made it because I just thought it might be helpful, and I've had stunning results with it. I have students often listen to it while they're sleeping, especially the ones with severe auditory processing problems. It cleared up a child's speech problem. I mean, he was way behind, and he wound up reading. His decoding skills were on grade level within a month, within a couple of months. I mean, again, I'm not a researcher. I'm terrible as a researcher. So can I tell you exactly what? No. But I can tell you within a reasonable amount of time, there was a dramatic difference in his comprehension, in his speech. And then I taught him reading separately. I did a little reading, and it took 3 lessons and he was off teaching himself to read. And so that audio file, which is under the Phonics Discovery System 5 Stories, is on YouTube, and you can find it there. And for the transcript for the 5 stories, follow the link in the video description. And there's a completed transcript in there. I hope you enjoyed this video and can use this process to help your students. And thank you so much for watching.